I'm Matt Landau from VRMB, and this is Unlocked, Season 8, First Mover Status. This episode features Madeline List, a senior research analyst at Phocuswright, which is a leading travel industry research platform. Historically, the broader travel sector hasn't really understood our nascent movement, at least in my opinion. And I think it's because we haven't had good enough research to explain ourselves or the story of our rise to others. Madeline's almost single-handedly changing that from a research perspective. Today's conversation features macro trends like vacation rentals versus hotels in terms of market share, what travelers really want, plus plenty of action items to ensure that you are riding this wave for as long and as far as you'd like. This episode's brought to you by PointCentral, the leaders in smart home automation, and Breezeway, a property care and operations platform. As with every episode this season, we kick things off asking Madeline, what does first mover status mean to you?
So first mover status to me really means this opportunity to write the rule book and to set best practices as you go, moving into a blank space where someone hasn't been there before to talk about the best way to approach the customer, to approach your operations, to know your customer. And it's just this incredible tabula rasa that you can have to set the rules and set the standards in your space.
Did you say tabula rasa?
We have a blank slate.
I've never heard that phrase, but I'm going to start using it every chance that I get.
Yes.
All right, listeners, if that doesn't get you excited about today's conversation with Madeline, I don't know what does. Madeline, you work with Phocuswright, and I don't think all of our listeners are super familiar with it. So would you mind just sharing from a high level what the organization does?
Sure. So Phocuswright is the expert in consumer behavior within the travel and tourism space. We're known for our consumer research, really diving into that buyer psychology of travelers and people within the tourism space, as well as market sizings, tracking how large gross bookings are in different sectors of travel and tourism. Personally, I'm a senior analyst here at Phocuswright. I'm a researcher who both looks at big market trends that are happening among consumers and sometimes providers in the case of short-term rentals. And I really try to help people understand not just the market trends and where the market is going, but how a lot of the data and the numbers that can become really depersonalized on the page can have practical effects on people's business decisions.
You sound like you've described that to people before.
Once or twice, I've described this to people, yes.
And with your research into the short-term rental sector, I'm always curious, how do you explain our sector to people who are not necessarily in it? Because when I try explaining it, they say, oh, like Airbnb, and I find myself going down a rabbit hole explaining that there's a whole professional world. Is there a way that you've figured out to help people understand what you mean when you say that?
I think it's really still formulating in a lot of ways, but I also try to explain to people that while Airbnb is one platform and one that's very well known for its successes, there's an entire ecosystem that has to support the types of property that are on Airbnb. You have all sorts of professionals making things happen on the ground. You have technology platforms. You have different types of vendors and services. And that's only for one distribution channel. And then when we start to expand it, the world just gets bigger and bigger. So I think that one of the challenges and opportunities of talking about kind of an up and coming sector is the fact that sometimes the public doesn't have a really accurate view of what's happening here.
Well, let's get into that, because one of my absolute favorite sentiments that I heard from you was last year, 2021, when you talked about this pandemic phoenix was the phrase that you used to describe short-term rentals. And you said whether these travelers were hesitant about booking a short-term rental in the past or just really loyal to hotels, that there was a significant wave of travelers trying short-term rentals for the first time. And in that presentation, you quoted the ratio of short-term rental versus hotel share of total bookings in 2019 to be 17% for short-term rentals. You then move forward to 2020, and you said it had increased significantly to 23%. And in that presentation, you said in 2021, it was at 27%. So I'm first of all curious, based on your prediction, because 2022 was predicted at 23%, have you got an instinct of whether that's on point or it's going to change?
We're still kind of observing. One of the reasons that we really predicted that it was going to go down in terms of share of gross bookings is because hotels are also starting to gain steam, both in terms of opening up their properties and having more rooms available. And also on the consumer end, people are becoming more comfortable with staying in hotels as vaccines become more widely distributed and there's more comfort with the travel, that decision to travel in general. So we did predict that short-term rentals were going to decrease in share, but that doesn't mean that their own bookings aren't going to continue to grow and that they're not going to continue to see very much their own share of success. It's that hotels are growing at the same time.
Mm. And I would like to talk a little bit later about what hotels are starting to do to compete with vacation rentals. But along those same lines, you said that independent short-term rental management can be seen as both a strength and a weakness. And you hinted at that a couple minutes ago. Could you elaborate on how that perception matters?
Absolutely. So I think that one of the downsides of the hotel industry as we see it now and as so many consumers see it now is that it's become so standardized that there are so many times where if you see a picture of a hotel room, you wouldn't know where it was. You wouldn't know what type of property it was outside of that room. I think we're used to the same types of layouts, the same types of furniture, those same types of feelings. And in some ways, consumers wanted a little more spice. They wanted some more uniqueness in their experiences. And that's something that short term rentals can absolutely offer. I think I heard the term used in VRMA that short-term rentals have snowflake properties, that everything is just a little different in its own way, no matter which type of short-term rental property you go to. It's going to have its own little quirks about it. However, the other side of the standardization in the hotel world is that they can be really reliable and predictable in terms of what hotel brands offer. That when someone goes to a hotel giant like a Hilton property, a Marriott property, they have a really solid expectation of the standards of quality that those types of brands offer. And when we don't have major players that are anywhere near that size in the short-term rental world, it means that you sign up to go to an Airbnb property. You can submit a booking request and have it approved, and it can look really good. And from the outset, consumers don't necessarily know if they're going to get just this incredible, special, unique, cherished experience, or if maybe it's a host where something might go wrong and there might be issues. So the uniqueness really has its strengths and its weaknesses within this space where having fewer expectations of a property could be really exciting, but it could also be a little scary for consumers making their purchasing decisions.
And I put myself in that category. I do have a wonderful Rolodex of professional vacation rental managers around the world, but there are places I go where I don't know anybody. And it is quite a crapshoot just trying to pick from a big long list on a booking platform or trying to Google and sift through all the organic results. It is really like roulette in order to determine what the outcome is. Is that something that has been changing over the years?
I think that we're in the middle of the change that's happening, that along with a lot of the professionalization, which is such a buzzword here. I try not to overuse the term professionalization, but along with that professionalization that has been happening in the category, we're moving more towards more common standards of practice and standards of quality within the short-term rental space. But it's just we have to have respect for the fact that hotels have been, especially some of the big legacy hotel brands, have been running for decades, or even I think Hilton is over a century old at this point. And that's really a lot of time to set best practices. So we're more of a nascent sector if you look over in short term rentals, and figuring out those really good standards and those best practices. It's happening now, it's happening in real time.
And do you think in terms of like proper training and best in class practices, is that something that maybe we can learn from the hotel space, if not downright steal?
I think there's so much that can be learned from hotels in a positive way. One of the things we see in terms of how short-term rental users view the hotel versus short-term rental categories is that hotels have this great service presence, that they're super professional about the way they act with their guests, that they understand other things about the trip as well that they can help people with. They know all about the neighborhood. They can give great recommendations for tours and activities. They can help with transit. They can help people book a restaurant. And that's not always a kind of a suite of service offerings that you get from short-term rentals. So there's definitely a lot of understanding. There's definitely a lot of understanding that hotels and the kind of concierge programs that come with them have great service offerings. I think that while things like that can be a challenge to adapt to the short-term rental space, and we'll probably need some good technological workarounds, that it's a big opportunity for short-term rentals to bring in high service standards.
Speaking of this adapting to accommodate idea, that was kind of what I gleaned from a number of articles that I've read by you and this presentation. One of the things that really stood out to me was how most vacation rental professionals were viewing their competition as other vacation rental professionals in their area. Whereas the travelers that were booking those properties are actually, in a lot of cases, considering both options. Do you think that short-term rental operators are perhaps becoming complacent, not staying really on the front line of that change as we're all experiencing this boom time?
Yeah, I worry about that a lot. And even anecdotally, when I was at VRMA and I was chatting with people and going to sessions, I so rarely heard people bring up hotels and bring up other types of lodging competition that's out there. And it's something where I do want to ring the bell and make sure it's on people's radars. I, of course, think that short term rentals should be celebrating the success that they've seen. And I think it's amazing when I look at the growth that's happened here. But in order to keep that growth going, and in order to keep those guests who had tried rentals for the first time in the pandemic staying with rentals and using rentals more consistently, it means having consideration for what hotels in the area are offering. And right now we're seeing that that's not always happening. We did a survey of smaller short-term rental hosts. So by smaller, I mean under 10 properties in the portfolio. And we asked those hosts who we thought their primary competition was. And it was much more common for hosts to say that their competition were short-term rentals than to say their competition were hotels, especially with mid-tier hosts among mid-tier properties. But
And what is the definition of mid-tier?
it's a little wishy-washy when it comes to short-term rentals. It has to be self-defined right now because we don't have that star system yet to rate it. And I'll be the first to start using those more formal definitions if we have them, when we have them. But right now, it's such a hard definition here in short-term rentals because we can see either by price tier or just observing the standards of quality that we have more budget, more mid-tier, more upscale and luxury properties. But I think we're a little too new to really have universal definitions of what that means.
Got it. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's a good question. I wish I had a better answer at this point. But in the mid tier, we're seeing especially that those hosts see that their other competition is mostly just other short-term rental hosts at the same luxury tier. But it's a problem because then when we ask short-term rental guests what types of lodging they consider when they book a short-term rental, we see that they are considering way more than just rentals. That the majority of guests, in fact, who had a recent short-term rental stay also looked at hotels. So it's so important to understand from the consumer perspective that lodging is lodging, and somebody does not necessarily want to book a vacation and say from the outset that they want a short-term rental. There are so many consumers where in the booking process, they need to be convinced. They need to see that right property, that right price, that right location, that right offering. And while more and more people are coming to love the category, that doesn't mean they're going to be strictly loyal to it or only consider that given short-term rental category for any given trip they're going on.
And you talked about earlier about personality, and within VRMB, we have a concept called the theory of limited edition, which argues that vacation rental companies, and really any small business, should focus on the aspects of local, family, owned or operated, and specialization. And if you do that internally, but also externally by repeating these phrases almost too many times, that we are a locally headquartered company, we are family owned for so many years, we specialize in these specific kinds of properties, that really repeating that kind of thing from a pure copywriting perspective is actually very much underrated, because we tend to assume that people know we're small, family owned, local, specialized companies. Do you think that the mere act of stating it is outsized in this sense?
Well, there are a couple important things about those concepts you listed because I think, especially in a sector that's actively growing, where many people working in short-term rentals just have not even been in the industry for so long. If that's a benefit that a company enjoys, then it's something that they should be vocal about, because if you're competing with other properties where someone's just been listing a property for a year, for 2 years, and you have been there for so much longer and have the benefit of so much more seasoning and experience, that's definitely a major perk, especially when there's still so much trust building that needs to be built with guests in a sharing economy like the short-term rental sector. Um, and then the other thing that you mentioned that I think is really important is that limited edition quality, because like I said, for all of the benefits that hotels have to offer, they're not necessarily great at really showing that uniqueness that short-term rentals can so often offer. And we're seeing it in the consumer data that people are looking for properties that feel intriguing, that feel interesting, that feel novel, that feel like they belong to the neighborhood and belong to the locale. It becomes especially important with more upscale properties and more upscale customers who look for that even more. But it's a reason why people go to the short-term rental category in the first place so often. And if you can show how your properties are really special, feel unique, feel interesting, and feel like they can give you a flavor of wherever your destination is, that's a major perk for consumers.
And to take it one level deeper, explaining who you are, what your story is, what brought you to this destination, what you like to do in your free time. That also has a way of endearing, in a limited edition sense, prospective travelers. Madeline, I got to give you a shout out. You're training at circus school these days.
Yes.
At least I read this on your About Us page. Is this true?
Yeah, I've been practicing on the aerial silks, training on aerial fabrics since about 2016. So
Aerial silks. I don't even know what that means.
you've probably seen them in one place or another. They're like fabrics that hang down from the sky, and you learn to climb up them and do different types of tricks, flips, drops. So I like to keep life interesting beyond just studying short-term rentals.
That is impressive. And I'm also curious, you mentioned was that your first VRMA to attend?
It was.
What did you leave being most surprised by?
I I think it was a really good wake up call for me to see how so many property managers, while they're really thinking big in their business plans and their marketing, are still very in touch with what's happening in individual properties. And given how expansive some of the portfolios were of the guests and how many issues they have to contend with on the day to day to just keep things up and running, I was really impressed by how closely a lot of managers still have their ears to the ground.
Hmm. We use the phrase operational complexity in the most admirable sense often. Do you think that operational complexity perhaps changes the way our cottage sector evolves versus something that is perhaps more naturally scalable?
Yeah, I see it as a double edged sword in so many ways because I think is first of all during COVID, the need for something that felt more private got to feel much more relevant and became something that was so sought after. And so the between the privacy and the amenities and that feeling of uniqueness in each individual property, that feeling of being nestled in the community if you're in that cottage type of property, that became so much more desirable. And it was already becoming more desirable, but it really added fuel to the
Mhm.
fire when we saw accommodations trends shift from the pandemic. But on the other hand, there are so many operational benefits that come from being centralized, just
Mm.
location wise, that in a hotel setting, you have your laundry facilities right there, you have your maintenance right there, you have managers and overseers who are able to just pop into a room to check quality control at all sorts of times. And when you're dealing with properties that are spaced out and a portfolio that's just geographically scattered, a lot of those benefits of centralization get lost. And then it introduces this big question of how do you set high standards and keep them high when you can't have the centralization and the oversight that hotels are benefiting from?
Mm. We've been filming a new docu-series going behind the scenes of some of the leading vacation rental professionals. And this concept of economies of scale, it really put it into focus for me because if you are a single property owner, or let's say you maybe own 3 or manage 8, your costs of doing laundry, let's say, might be $1.15 per pound. But if you take a page out of the hotel playbook and build your own laundry facility, let's say, and are suddenly able to do that exact same laundry at 50 cents, and I'm pulling these numbers directly from our first episode, which features a company called V Trips, it's a direct advantage compared to the smaller players who simply don't have access to that So that makes a lot of sense to me, even for a small player starting to think about ways to centralize, whether it's just your operations, but perhaps even teaming up with other vacation rental players. Is that something you've seen before?
It's not something that I've seen personally too much. One of the things that I have heard brought up a lot in terms of improving that is improving the tech options that are available. So that's one of the conversations that I'm following, and I think the tech options really have, like, some of them are still in development and still improving, and um, there are so many people who are still in need of making sure that there are ways of upholding certain operational standards, even with something as simple as laundry or cleaning or turnover. And when you can't have upper management there in the space when it's being turned over, when they can't always pop in super easily right after turnover to check and make sure everything's okay, having really good tech platforms and tech options that can facilitate that type of oversight is one of the things I've heard brought up the most as a solution that we want to work towards.
Hmm. We've done a lot of research on the software space, and our general conclusion is that the core property management software as a pillar to run your business is primordial. The ever evolving space of third party tools that can be plugged into that property management software, whether it's for pricing or guest guidebooks, is also increasingly important. And there are increasing amount of tools that offer really awesome services. Is that the general story that you've been following, or are you seeing something different?
It's the story that I've been following, and I think it ties back again to what I said about watching things unfold in real time, where some of the better developments are being worked on as we speak and are actively being rolled out. But one funny experience I had in Burma is that I was chatting with a couple of people who were talking about pricing strategy, and I have some gaps in my knowledge given that I am a researcher and I don't work firsthand in a lot of these operational sides. And so I asked if the pricing strategy and pricing optimization tools were at a level of sophistication that was comparable to the ones that hotels have. And the response I had was laughter. I people laughed at me for even asking before they could respond, and then they clarified that they were laughing not because the question was dumb or not worth asking, but just because it really is so far right now behind where hotels are that the we are actively figuring out how to optimize those types of things all across different touch points of the rental experience and the back end experience.
And just from our research perspective, we do see the property management software space being a little bit less frantic and ever changing. Granted, they all are improving rapidly. It's really amazing with the amount of money that's flowing in. The third party tools are certainly a bit chaotic. Just dipping your toe into that pool can drive you nuts trying to wrap your head around it all. But the general theme is to choose a core property management software that you can grow with for the next few years, and to also recognize that things are changing rapidly, and you may need to change your dynamic pricing tool or your guest book, or maybe even your property management software tool, because 3 years from now there's something tremendously better available. Just kind of swallowing that pill is the general advice that we've been giving.
Yeah, and I can see how that would be hard advice to take from the provider side. It's already difficult to get these systems set up, to train yourself to do it, to train your team to do it and do it well. But on the flip side, I also have such a sense of excitement about the fact that we're watching better options come out. And while the need for constant adaptation and the potential to have to constantly keep updating these systems is a really stressful one. It's also exciting when you think about the fact that better solutions might just be around the corner, whether it's updating with current providers that they're using for tech solutions, or whether it's because new tech solutions are going to be developed and come out soon.
Folks, you can take Madeline's advice here and demo any piece of technology that you come across, or you can take Madeline's advice and demo the tools that have been pre-vetted for you by your industry colleagues. This episode is brought to you by PointCentral and Breezeway, and they each represent a category of technology that we believe is important in the ultimate vacation rental management technology stack. PointCentral's smart home automation solutions are for smart vacation rental managers. They streamline the entire process, their guest experience, their smart locks, smart thermostats, water leak detectors, HVAC analytics, real-time alerts that allow you to see who is entering and leaving your homes so that you can coordinate with cleaning and maintenance. This kind of smart home automation is a complete game changer. Almost everybody that I know who uses smart home automation could never imagine running their business any other way. It greatly reduces fees and stress and inefficiencies. We would encourage you to do a demo over at pointcentral.com/VRMB. And Breezeway, which is a property care and operations platform, another category of technology that once you adopt, you could never envision yourself doing things any other way. With tools for intelligent task scheduling, quality assurance, real work coordination with your maintenance and housekeeping teams, guest messaging, which is a feature that's been really popular lately. Breezeway is helping thousands of short-term rental managers and hospitality operators increase their operational efficiency, reduce the amount of manual work, and of course, boost service revenue. It was created by the founding team of Flipkey, which was then acquired by TripAdvisor. Breezeway is really elevating the experience of every vacation rental guest at every property. And you can do a demo with them at breezeway.io/VRMB. And if you choose to use their software, they will waive their implementation fee. That is a $1,000 value right there, so long as you let them know you heard them on the pod. All right, let's get back to the show.
Let's get into some traveler trends. I know this is the thing that unites the whole travel sector. I want to talk about luxury. I want to talk about working vacations, and I want to talk about international travelers. Let's start with the luxury and specifically upscale vacation rentals. Do you see expectations from guests changing? And if so, if I'm a vacation rental manager who manages luxury properties, what advice do you have to get kind of ahead of the game?
So, just to start, we absolutely see that guests who have histories of staying in more upscale properties have some very different expectations of the properties, but also a lot of very, very different attitudes in general. So, to start with the plus side of what we see from these more luxury guests, they are very loyal. They make more effort to go back to properties where they've had positive experiences. They're obviously willing to pay some premiums as luxury guests. And they also display a lot of optimism that the short-term rental properties available can rival the luxury hotel standards in the future. And so that's amazing to see that optimism coming right from the consumer. On the other hand, there are some aspects of this audience that can make them a little trickier to cater to because their service standards are so much higher. They really believe in a lot of those value offerings that hotels have given them and those value standards that hotels have set, where they are expecting just a service with other aspects of the trip besides just the accommodations. They're expecting more service with their things like their tours and activities, with transportation. They're expecting more professionalism coming from the providers. But they like short-term rentals for some really cool things that short-term rentals can offer, such as that type of novelty and that uniqueness. We see that the thirst for properties that feel more interesting, that have more character, more personality, more interesting histories is especially pronounced among those luxury guests. And so short term rentals are so well positioned to cater towards that type of appetite that they have. So there are really a lot of big areas of potential I see in terms of making sure we have more high quality luxury properties available for them. But when I talk about the growth of this sector, I always feel so cautious in what I'm encouraging, because with those high premium ADRs that those properties have potential to charge, there are also really high expectations and some high standards and a lot of comparisons with luxury hotel properties happening.
And do you think that some of these companies like Marriott Homes and Villas are acting as a bridge in that sense, beginning to offer the conventional hotel traveler a luxury vacation villa instead?
Yeah, I think that they are playing a really interesting role here. And I think that they've displayed a lot of ability to listen to what their guests want and adapt to offer those properties with extra space or extra amenities or extra privacy. But to also try and do it coming from a brand standard that's known and that's trusted, and put their name on it in the sense that luxury consumers are expecting that when they book a Marriott Homes and Villas property, that they're also just getting that high quality and that consistency in quality that they would expect from the hotels as well. So I think that of course there's potential for other property managers who are just rental managers or even smaller hosts to enter that luxury space. I don't think they're excluded from there at all, but when it comes to upscale, those hotel brands are playing a really interesting role in terms of capitalizing on what luxury guests want from their stays and that extra space and amenities and kind of rental proposition that can be catered to.
There was a funny little microcosm of the crossroads that is the traditional world of hotels with vacation rentals. We had a discussion in our online community in which a manager was considering joining the Marriott Homes and Villas program, but he found a clause in the contract that was requiring exclusivity, meaning he couldn't, if he was to sign the agreement, then list his properties on other competitors of Marriott, which included Accor and a number of others. And in the end, this manager decided to draw the line because he didn't feel that was right for his business. And he kind of felt he needed to protect his independence, his ability to be agile, and ended up not using Marriott Homes and Villas, but using One Fine Stay, which would have been a direct competitor and thereby not available to him. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting little example of some of the conundrums that small businesses in our space are starting to face. And I think maybe you just have to pay careful attention because it's not the hotel industry necessarily.
Yeah, and another market level issue that you might find interesting that we saw with the upscale space is that a lot of the home owners or the hosts who have luxury, upscale, short-term rentals are also using it for their own personal use and their personal enjoyment more so than lower tier properties. So it can create this extra element of complication there, because on the one hand, there's this whole potential for a big premium property there and premium offerings. But on the other hand, if it's being used more as a vacation home for the owner, or more for primary enjoyment, then I do wonder, looking at the market, how aggressively they can push their homes and push the standards of quality of those homes if they're using them primarily to kind of subsidize their expenses instead of treating it really like its own independent business.
I definitely want to touch on the business goals of short-term rental owners and managers in a moment, but let's not get sidetracked. Let's get into our second group of traveler. These are the working vacation types. The phrase digital nomads has become like super cliche, but that's the best that we've got. I know you're doing a separate project about digital nomads, so you're going to have unique perspective here. Can you share who are these people who are doing these extended stays and how our listeners can potentially accommodate them?
Yeah, and this is a really exciting and burgeoning group of travelers for me, and one where I'm definitely a member of this demographic in a few different ways. But
So am I, for sure. I refer to myself as digital nomad.
that's perfect. I wish I had. Oh, I could be digital Madeline. That works
No,
too.
Madeline. Yeah, I like this as a team. Okay, go on.
We got this. So we did a separate study on digital nomads, and we qualified that in a couple of different ways. Either people who identified with a full lifestyle of digital nomadism, where they were away from home for months at a time, working from other places, or also people who we called blended vacationers or working vacationers, who just started taking much more frequent trips where they would have some leisure components, but also be working for parts of the trip. And obviously, COVID has really enabled that to happen a lot more. And so it's a trend that we're seeing kind of take off in a great way because of the pandemic, and the remote work capabilities are sending out a lot more working vacationers or blended travelers out into the short-term rental space. And one of the interesting things we found is that the demographics of people who are doing these types of trips are not the stereotypical demographics of the young 20 somethings bouncing through hostels and going through budget properties and posting on Instagram about it at every step of the way. That a lot of the people who are able to work at this lifestyle are actually a bit on the older side. We saw plenty of people in the 35 to 54-year age group doing it. And we also saw that these are really not the budget travelers who are taking on this lifestyle. A lot of the people who can afford digital nomadism or taking a lot of blended vacations can do it because they're in higher income brackets. They're more senior at work, they're more educated than the general population. And so it's really important to keep in mind that, especially when it comes to properties that are a little more upscale and a little nicer, you're actually more likely to get these working vacationers and people who are utilizing the properties not just for leisure purposes, but also as a temporary office space while they're staying there.
Do you approve of the word bleisure?
I do. I don't use it in reporting specifically, but I don't condemn it.
All right. I tend to, when I say it, I giggle afterwards because it sounds funny. But how, if these bleisures, these business leisure, work vacations, digital nomads, blended, all these phrases, if these people are increasingly considering properties that maybe they hadn't before and they're ready to pay top dollar, are there specific things beyond just high-speed internet and a nice comfy workspace that people should be thinking about?
Yeah. So I don't want to diminish, first of all, the importance of high-speed internet. We definitely saw it brought up quite often as something that's something that's important to people. So high-speed internet and strong cell reception are, of course, two really important things that to consider if someone's going to be working from your property. But there was also a lot of appetite to know about other aspects of the space that could make it good for work. Like, are there working spaces other than just the dining room table where somebody could set up? Are there quiet spaces to take calls? So many people are going on these types of vacations also to spend time outdoors. So, do you have areas where people can work outdoors? Do you have areas where people can work while enjoying views from the property? Or do you have also other potential working spaces that are nearby? Are you near cafes? Are you near libraries? Anything like that? One of the things that I realized after seeing how much need there was for more information about the quality of working spaces from digital nomads is that there are many properties that already offer things like this that aren't talking about it on their listings. And so, while I think that many hosts do need to consider some reconfigurations or upgrades, maybe to their internet or their layout, or maybe adding a desk somewhere if there's room for it, there's also the question of, if you already have it, are you making clear in your listings when guests are browsing through properties that you would be a good property to work remotely from?
This is kind of in line with stating what we might feel is obvious, but is actually a new standard for the guest who is looking for that kind of product. And I do tend to get very inspired when I see potential work environments that I could be writing from. So I'm loving all of our colleagues who are investing in new photography, for instance, little vignettes of where someone's work could be done. You know, it used to be the little cabin in the woods for writing, but now it's like almost any occupation or profession could be this digital nomad. So making your spaces accommodating seems like a low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also can have um, reviews can be an important facet of that as well, because we see that when guests or potential guests are looking at reviews, they don't just see reviews as a way of making sure the property is the quality that's stated, but they're also looking in reviews to see if people are using the property in a similar way to how they want to use it. There are a lot of people who are working remotely who frequently said that it would encourage them to book a property if they saw reviews from other remote workers who had a positive experience. However, as someone who's a big short-term rental user, I have to say that unfortunately, I don't see too often many reviews that mention that, even though we know statistically that people are working remotely from short-term rentals pretty often. And there might be a lot of guests who don't think to mention the way they're using the property. And it can be an opportunity for hosts or property managers to kind of nudge guests who have good experiences as well to say, listen, if you were working remotely from here, if things were smooth, if you had a positive experience with that way of using the property, could you mention it in your reviews? Because it can be such a good signal for future guests who want to use the property in a similar fashion.
Love that. And another just thing you could do today is literally comb through all your reviews. And if somebody talks about how lovely it was to be able to work in that quiet space, this suddenly becomes an asset. Let's move into the third little group of travelers here, international travelers. I'd say about a third of vacation rental professionals in the States, certainly, that listen to this do cater to that demographic. What are you seeing in terms of the way international travel is rebounding from the pandemic through the lens of vacation rentals, perhaps versus hotels?
So we studied short-term rental users who were American but traveling abroad, and I'm going to talk about some of the themes that we saw from there to consider, because they can very easily apply as well to inbound travelers who are coming into the US from other markets, as well as those US travelers who are leaving the country and the way they think about their accommodations. Because one of the things that was so interesting to me when I was looking through the data was that people were much more willing to consider a broad set of lodging options when they were going to international markets. That there seems to be something about that short-term rental option that feels super comfortable when you're in your home country, when you speak the language, when you think it's going to be easy to navigate your tours and activities and other services that you might need. But when you're in a place that is more foreign and may not be as comfortable to navigate, all of a sudden the rental doesn't seem as much of a go-to option as it is for those domestic travelers. And sometimes it materializes in concerns that are as simple as just trusting that hotel workers will speak English more so than short-term rental hosts would have good English in other international markets. So we see some big indications that short-term rentals are more of a go-to in domestic markets where people feel comfortable. And then they're considering a lot more types of lodging categories when they're traveling abroad.
And is your feeling, I'm guessing this was not in your part of your research, but do you think that people, as they begin to travel after being pent up and stressed out internationally, will be perhaps more adventuresome or vulnerable or open to off the beaten path kinds of experiences versus pre-pandemic?
Well, I think of it not necessarily in terms of just the desire to be vulnerable, but also the desire for privacy and fewer crowds that some of those properties can really offer. I think that's what rentals cater to really well. But then sometimes you have markets where, if you think about something like a beach market abroad, for instance, where hotels really got all the first dibs in construction on premier beachside property. And so then there's also a little bit of extra marketing and convincing and finessed listing qualities that have to go into showing guests how great it can be to be in an apartment that might not necessarily be right by the beach, or be in a villa that might not necessarily be in what's considered the best location possible internationally.
That makes a lot of sense. I had really wanted to touch on this final point of business goals, recognizing that our space is either famous or infamous, depending on what perspective you're coming from, for having a whole bunch of different kinds of stakeholders, each of whom have a whole bunch of different definitions for success. Some want to build huge businesses, others just want to enjoy their vacation home. When you look at some of the smaller end of the spectrum, how do these business goals affect the general public in terms of travelers and how our sector is perceived?
So when we surveyed smaller hosts, so again, portfolios of fewer than 10 properties in the US, we found that less than half of them were looking to generate profit from their short-term rental. It was really common to just be looking to either offset your mortgage, to cover your mortgage and rent expenses, but maybe not make extra money on top of that. And even among the people who wanted to generate profit, a lot of times they weren't looking for full-time income. It might just have been extra spending money, or part-time income, but they weren't necessarily quitting their day jobs for a lot of hosts. And this is another area where I see so many blessings and curses to that type of setup, because I think that it is such a fabulous business opportunity, and it's really special that there are opportunities to open a short-term rental or a few short-term rentals and list them, potentially also get some personal benefit from the property, and have that side income and the potential for money making from your properties. But where I get concerned is I don't want it to be seen as such a side business that it's not taken seriously in terms of the quality of standards and the opportunity to really grow the business and have it perceived as something that is a really high comfort stay, enjoyable stay, a professional experience in the way people are interacting with hosts. And that's a concern that I have right now, that I look at the market in terms of worrying that people will see it as such a side hustle that they don't see themselves as full members of the demanding hospitality industry.
That, I think, is something for us to figure out, because I've always felt that it's a great advantage to be a small business that knows exactly what you want from the product or service that you're selling, exactly where that income and how much it is fits in your lifestyle. It may defy business school economics. It might be something that doesn't make sense on paper, and yet it's an avenue to achieve this way of living that you desire. And I've always viewed it as a positive thing for the little guy. But as a traveler, you don't necessarily want to be spending your hard-earned vacation money with somebody who's going to be bossing you around and telling you to clean up the dishes after your stay, and, not viewing it as a hospitality experience. So I really appreciate, you've done it a couple times throughout our conversation today, presenting both sides of the equation, the strengths and weaknesses of this positioning. And I suppose as the independent player, you get to decide what your blend looks like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I do think that when I consider where I hope the industry moves to in the next few years, I hope that people will see themselves as small business owners, even if you're running a short-term rental as a side hustle, even if it's not a full-time income, that there will be more understanding of how to really anticipate guest needs, make people super happy from the outset. Don't wait until people complain in order to make changes or make things more comfortable, and understand that people are going to have certain expectations if they're paying a few $100s a night for their property, and they might not feel like just your house guest when they're shelling out quite a few bucks in order to have their stay at your property. But I think it still can be such a good perk to understand that this can be one side of your income and one side of your life, and you don't necessarily need to quit your day job in order to be a great short-term rental host.
I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. My big takeaway is potentially a blind spot for vacation rental owners and managers. At least it's certainly one that I don't think about nearly enough. And that is viewing hotels as a kind of competition. Not in a direct sense. After all, we do offer a very different product. It's apples to oranges. But more in an adjacent sense. Travelers are now considering vacation rentals alongside hotels at an alarming rate. In that sense, apples and oranges are both fruits. We are a category, and we need to fight for our market share. In this sense, we can learn from the hotel industry, the consistency, the customer service, the things that they do well, while flexing the strengths that we all know make us limited edition champions. Madeline had asked if I could include in the show notes 2 links to reports. One is called Through the Roof, Short-Term Rentals in the USA 2021. The other one's called The New Nomads, Work and Play from Anywhere. And I will include both of those links in the show notes. If you want to reach out to Madeline directly, her email is mlist@Phocuswright. That's WRIGHT.com. And VRMB has put together a trends report of our own. You can download that at vrmb.com/trends. Until next time.